I'll go ahead and read this whole thing out. Lekars' exchange principle and stellar metamorphosis and a few explanations. Hi, Celeste. This is about the fact that there's no such thing as a perfect crime. No such thing. There's always evidence. Specific type of principle here is provided to explain why there is always evidence. Abstract, the single greatest contribution, the theory of detection and criminology, to the theory of detection and criminology was provided by Edmund Lekars as his exchange principle. It is the notion that the perpetrator, or the criminal, nature or animal, always leaves some physical evidence at the crime scene or event and simultaneously takes some evidence away. This is to show that not all evidence will be immediately available unless it can be interpreted in a light that makes sense and is congruous to the other facts presented. This is to mean that nature and or animal will always leave their signature on the event and are in turn contaminated by it. Explanation is provided. There are no perfect crimes, only as yet unsolved ones. This means any event that transpires can be reverse engineered and solved, including crimes committed by human beings or nature and or various tools, which can be extraordinarily deceptive. With a murder case, say a person is stabbed to death, there will be evidence of specific knife marks on the body, as well fingerprints on the knife. So given the knife was used in the murder, more likely it will be removed from the scene as well as the body. So some evidence is removed, in this case the knife and the human being that was murdered. Unwittingly though, the evidence that could remain would be tire tracks of the vehicle the murderer used to transport the body, boot imprints in the ground, fibers from the murderer's clothing found where the murder transpired, etc. So what we have here is the fact that evidence can be removed, but the very act of removing the evidence, or even taking part in the event, also produces evidence that tells a tale. And that's why a lot of murderers get caught. That's why a lot of criminals get caught, is they think about the evidence in their own limited perspective. But for every event that transpires, they also leave other evidence that they don't think of. They can't cover the tracks perfectly. There's no such thing as a perfect crime. So with all events, Lekars' exchange principle is a potent reminder that every deception leaves something incongruous at the crime scene and simultaneously takes something away. This gives the detective, analyst, or scientist 2 bites of the proverbial apple. And this is mostly well said by Lekars himself. This is the guy that they basically wrote, what's his name? The famous detective, Sherlock Holmes. This is the guy that he wrote about. Quote, wherever he steps, whatever he touches, whatever he leaves, even unconsciously, will serve as a silent witness against him. Not only his fingerprints or his footprints, but his hair, the fibers from his clothes, the glass he breaks, the tool mark he leaves, the paint he scratches, the blood or semen he deposits or collects. All these and more bear mute witness against him. This is evidence that does not forget. It is not confused by the excitement of the moment. It is not absent because human witnesses are. It is factual evidence. Physical evidence cannot be wrong. It cannot perjure itself. It cannot be wholly absent. Only human failure to find it, study, and understand it can diminish its value. So basically, the reason why I wrote this paper here, what I'm about to read to you, is because the value of the evidence is ignored by astronomers. They don't look at it as being evidence. They say, oh, that's not actual evidence. This is the true evidence. But as we know from Lekars' exchange principle, we don't necessarily have to have witnesses for how the Earth formed. We don't actually have to have been here to watch the Earth in its formation moments. We don't actually have to watch the sun form into something Earth-like or Jupiter-like along its evolution. We can take the evidence that we have here, the very little bits of it, and reverse engineer the Earth to find out what it was actually like. And I'll read this out to you guys. It is often argued that I cannot present any evidence towards the realization that the Earth is an ancient star. But this is a false argument and based on the failure of human scientists and internet trolls to find it, study, and understand it, where its value is diminished. The case stands. Astronomers were claiming to understand how stars evolved long before they knew about brown dwarfs, which is a stage of evolution where stars begin to cool enough to stop shining brightly. That's the center stage. It's the missing link in Abruzzo's words. Stellar evolution models were drawn up a full half-century before brown dwarfs were discovered. The evidence was totally human failure to find it, study, and understand it. On a different note, the evidence for Earth having been much more massive is apparent as nature simultaneously left evidence of her actions, while removing some other evidence, and this is really important. It is a curious case of hydrogen, and presents the paradox of how it got to combine with rocks, minerals, and even oxygen to form vast oceans to begin with. And this is going to be a little bit complex here, so hang on. The velocity of hydrogen gas at temperatures above 120 Kelvin is high enough to escape Earth's gravitational pull. It's very energetic. It goes straight up into outer space. Yet hydrogen exists in large quantities on the Earth, combined with other elements taking the form of molecules such as water, various rocks and minerals composing plant and animal life, and even buried deep in the interior of the Earth, combined with carbon in the form of oil and natural gas. This being said, if the Earth was hot when it was forming around the same heat as liquid rocks, or about 1,000 Kelvin, then the hydrogen would have escaped the Earth's gravitational pull very easily and never combined into molecules in any large amount. Hydrogen is very light and has a high velocity at even low temperatures, so it would never have been pulled in by Earth's tiny gravity. The oceans, which would have evaporated as well as water vapor at 1,000 Kelvin, would have had enough velocity to escape Earth's pull as well. Oceans would have not have formed if the Earth was its current as-is mass when it was forming from rocks clumping together as accepted by the dogma. So it's a paradox. Basically what I'm saying here is the dogma, they say Earth formed with its current mass. And then they also say it formed from a cloud of hydrogen and helium gas that was left over from the sun. Well, they got a problem there. You can't have Earth's weak gravitational field holding on to any hydrogen and helium gas. Especially hydrogen, because hydrogen is found in large amounts combined with carbon, making oil and natural gas, and even composes our bodies in the form of water, which is H2O. How exactly can they have hydrogen stay when Earth's gravity was way, way too weak to hold on to any of it? That's the paradox. But the paradox is solved. Earth was easily a gas giant well in its past, which explains the prevention of atmosphere loss. All the molecules formed on Earth were formed when the Earth was vastly larger. A larger gravitational field would prevent the hydrogen from escaping. Instead, it would be compressed and form molecules in chemical reactions, the same chemicals we find in rocks, minerals, life, and found buried deep in the interior of the Earth, as well as the asteroids entering into the high atmosphere, which act as catalysts. And I review that in the inertia paper, where I have iron-nickel meteorites entering at extreme velocities in the high atmosphere of the early Earth when it was something like Jupiter, and that acts as a surface catalyst for all the chemical reactions to take place. That's why molecules get more and more complex as they evolve. All smaller rocky bodies in space that contain hydrogen were individual stars or remains of collisions between stars. There is no other way to trap the hydrogen during formation unless the gravitational field is big enough to allow for molecular synthesis of the hydrogen into heavier molecules. And here's where I explain the whole purpose of this with Lekars' exchange principle. So the missing evidence, the evidence removed by the process of stellar evolution, is the fact that the Earth has very little hydrogen as opposed to the heavier material, but that is the path the stars take. They lose their hydrogen if it does not combine with other elements on large scales. Yet the trace amounts, the evidence of Earth having been vastly more massive than its current size, is the fact that the hydrogen is here and is combined with oxygen and rocks and minerals and the life on the Earth. So the scientific detective can have 2 bites of the proverbial apple. As well, there are technological advancements in astronomical imaging and processing. Stars that no longer shine should be found. They should be observed to be losing large amounts of hydrogen gas and the researchers have found them. They're called hot Jupiters, which is a Jupiter-sized object that's orbiting really close to a star and its atmosphere is being lost. The reason for writing this paper is to show that people who tell me, "Where is the evidence?" is a half-baked question, used to troll and does not possess counter-deception attributes. You also have to look where the evidence is missing, misplaced, or removed, giving the appearance that it does not exist, which in itself is evidence. The astronomers, they're not trained to look at the stars in the light of a detective. They're trained to look at what is there and then take their assumptions that they were trained to believe in graduate school and apply those to them. They're not trained to question their assumptions and actually ask the question, hey, has the evidence been removed? They're not trained to do that. They're not trained to look at the big picture like a detective does. In Barton Whaley's view, the detective has what's called the Analyst Advantage. And Barton Whaley says here, quote, "Whoever creates a deception simultaneously creates all the clues needed for its solution. Moreover, every deception necessarily generates a minimum of 2 clues, at least one about the real thing being hidden, and at least one other about the false thing being shown." Sure, Earth is not as massive as the Sun and contains far less hydrogen, but the evidence in the rocks and life itself which possess hydrogen. The hydrogen itself could not have coalesced in any nebula other than one with a gravitational field much stronger than the Earth currently possesses. This means Earth was vastly more massive. We are witnessing what the Sun will be as well. The intermediate stages between Earth and the Sun are apparent now, and the term exoplanet, which is a relatively new term to us, but has been there before humans were even human. And for those that are new, oh gosh, type in Walensky-Taylor diagram on Google and look up the picture of it. You'll see a very large graph. Baz, I have yet to make that. Big printout. I'll get to it soon. All right, guys, take it easy.